Hi everybody, hope you're doing marvelously well. We're here in Shell Rock, Iowa. Why are we here, you might ask? Well, we're here because Wade from Chandler runs his whole company from just down there on the street. Chandler, as I'm sure you know, makes mic pre's, compressors, EQs, you name it. It's all done in conjunction with Abbey Road using the original schematics of the incredible stuff that the EMI engineers built that made records, as I'm sure you know, like, of course, the Beatles, and little bands like Pink Floyd, and many, many other things. Of course, quite frankly, some of the best recorded classical music in the whole world was recorded in Studio 1 and Studio 2 at Abbey Road using the TG desks, the red desks, all this incredible stuff. And Wade from Chandler makes this equipment, handmade here in Iowa, in Shell Rock. Think about this, Shell Rock. How apt is that Chandler is built in Shell Rock? Well, Wade, take us through the manufacturing process.
Okay. Well, we do everything by hand, so all the units are hand wired, kind of like custom shop sort of approach. We wanted to make everything like they were made back in the Abbey Road days at Hayes or wherever, you know. So if you look at things, we do have circuit boards, but they're all hand-wired circuit boards. Even the layouts on them, I try and lay them out like turret boards. Right. So that it still resembles like it would be in a guitar amp or, you know, some of the old units. But literally, he's got his example. It's all the wiring is done by hand, and there's no ribbons. This is an RS. Which one is this, bro? 660 yep. That he's working on. 124s. So it's a similar approach on that unit, turret board style layout, hand wired up to the tubes. You know, like when people modernize things, they're even sticking tubes in the circuit board, the sockets, you know, yeah. And you get high voltage on traces over time. If you know some of the guitar amp history, when they started trying to switch over, you had companies mounting the tubes. Those amps have not survived well. Do you know what I mean? So we actually mount the sockets sideways and then wire up to them.
And is that how they were originally done?
Well, that's more like an old approach to it. Yeah, they were all wired to the tube sockets.
Handmade in Iowa.
In Iowa, of
Lovely.
All places. Here, for example, just more stuff coming in. Here's curve benders where they're starting on them. It looks like we're doing a bunch of RS stuff right now. But like prepping transformers. Yeah. We do all this resistors directly on the switch, yeah. Like they were made in 1969 or, you know, Neve did it that way too. All the old EMI stuff was that way. And we just don't want to change anything. I think it changes the sound. These? These are Elma, which is, you know, they're gold Swiss-made kind of switches that was used on all the classic gear.
Beautiful. Still seems to be the Swiss, isn't it? Biore and Elma.
Yeah.
The companies that everybody goes to.
And they're way too expensive, let me tell you. So the curve bender has like 20 Elma switches in it. Yowza. 20 like that, yeah. You know. Red mic power supplies, TG2s, TG2 500s. This is a stack of 660s they're working on. So Jason does all our mini mixers.
Hey, Jason.
He's the only one that does them.
Very beginning
And he's making the back plane of them with all this, with the summing resistors and all that, which goes in the back. How long did you spend on one of those, buddy?
One mixer, I can, from top to bottom, probably about 4 or 5 days.
Wow. Yeah. You build the input modules and everything. So he's talking about everything from top to bottom.
Yeah.
It's modular, so all the cards plug in on the front, just sort of like an older desk would be. Let's talk to Marlene and look at curve benders, because that's a really big.
Wow, look at this.
Yeah.
That is crazy.
Marlene does curve benders full time. Luckily, we sell enough that one person has to do them, and she's an expert at them.
How long have you been making these?
Oh, what was it, 2008?
Yeah,
or
yeah.
2007?
So she's been here a long
15, 16 years.
But look at all the inductors in there. Look at all the hand wiring. Look at all the Elma switches. These are the germanium amps. We actually pot them. One, so people can't copy them, but also it helps with the heat. So she'll move it over to the Audio Precision there and sweeping all the curves.
How many would you do in a day?
Oh, I could probably do one and then start another one.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it takes longer than you think, especially the number of EQ points on there. I forget how many, and 2 channels of it. You got like 50 tests. 50 sweeps she has to do to get all the curves double checked. If you look at all the components, sorry to get in your way. Look at all the capacitors along there.
Yep.
They're also on the back.
Well,
to create the curves. Don't get too close on that, but there's a lot of minutia in those to get all the frequencies and curves, So literally that's an expanded version of the Mark I console. So we made the 2-band. That one was a set low frequency with a sweepable presence band, which was just peaks. But we made it into a full 4-band, so you can bell and shelf at the top and bottom. And then you have the presence bands in the middle. So what you can see is there's yellow and white markings on these. The white markings were the frequencies on the original desk. Yellow are frequencies that we added to fill in gaps between there. But again, like I had the documentation for the console. I literally went to the EQ calculations that they had from the original desk and just made new calculations for new frequencies and put them in there and made new inductors that included those. So it's way more fully featured than the other. Same germanium, Mark I console sound. The other really cool part that I like, that I use the most, is the individual toggle switch on each band. You can switch it out, but you can also, when you go down, it's 0.5 dB steps for sort of mastering style or for really fine tuning of mid-range. Or when you kick it up, it's 1.5 dB, like if you're tracking and you want to dig in a little more on something. Super flexible. I dig this little unit.
Yeah, beautiful.
The opto combination with the TG circuit is really cool because it can grab, but it's also a really smooth version of it with less of that sort of over the top that the TG can do sometimes. That was the whole approach on that.
I remember the first time I discovered your stuff, I was working with Dave Sardi.
Okay.
And so that we're talking 2004, so like 19 years ago.
Yeah.
You were pretty fresh at that point.
Brand new at that point.
Brand new. And it was just like we were sticking stuff on the master bus. It was pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a game changer.
So I dig this one because it's the TG sound, but a different approach. It's actually a good deal easier to make than the standard TG, so we were able to put it in a 500 rack at a good price. JC does all the TG2s. Again, we got one person full-time on TG2 circuits, so that's the 500 series one.
Gorgeous.
And then the rack mount version here. So this is the TG2. This is our biggest selling pre. Between this and that, we're like over 15,000 channels of TG2s.
Wow.
So, yep.
Congratulations.
The artwork on these, how far we try to take it, the curve bender, the Zener, the TG1, is directly taken off the artwork of vintage units. Whether I had to sort of recreate it by hand, but there's a lot of cases where I actually was able to find prints, not actual film, but prints and drawings of the artwork, which I could then scan into the computer and recreate one-to-one. So that's how far we've actually gone to make them original. Like if I pull out one of the modules upstairs, you'll see these patterns like one-to-one on those units out there.
So you've got the double here for the gain.
2-layer Elma switch, for the gain.
How much gain is on it?
That one goes up to
75?
It depends. Well, it depends if you're in 300 or 1200 impedance. So the gain front panel is actually set for 300, which has more gain. So it's lower gain when we switch it down to 12.
Okay.
So this is Jeremy. He's our head technician.
Hey Jeremy, how are you?
Very good. Nice to meet you.
So what are you doing at the moment? What are you working on?
Right now, I'm working on a 660. I'm prepping it to put on the burn rack. So basically, just looking it over, making sure it has the correct signal and voltage and distortion and noise, and
And checking tubes.
checking tubes, setting the meter, and then it'll actually sit on a burn rack for a while, and we'll actually make sure that, you know, all the tubes stay solid over a day or two. And then we'll come back and do a final test on it with audio and frequency response and check the knees. And make
Yep.
sure that everything's up to par on it.
I mean, because it's a specific sort of approach, you know, it's not literally meant to be a 660 or 670. It's meant to be a hybrid. If the engineers, if they were like, okay, we need a replacement for the Fairchild. We want it to be simpler, less problems because it doesn't have 14 tubes, you know, those types of things, which is exactly why the original 124 was brought in, because the RS114, the big green one you saw upstairs, it literally has 18 tubes for one channel, and it was a calibration nightmare and an upkeep nightmare. So they were like, okay, we're going to modify these Altecs, which we think have an interesting start. We like their transformers, et cetera, whatever their reasoning, and took it to the next step. So this was meant to be that same sort of approach.
Correct me if I'm wrong. So this is some schematics of something they were going to make and never did, and then you took it one stage further?
Well, no, it's literally, I started with a 124
Okay.
and said, if the old dudes were going to try and replace the Fairchild with this type of circuit, what would they do? That was really the whole concept behind it, and it just evolved. So there has a lot of modified RS124 history, but actually it's very good at getting that Fairchild grab. The new tubes are darker and have less compression, so I didn't feel like it was fair to the customer or even truthful. I'm not trying to stir any feathers, to make a 660 or 670 with a tube that literally functions differently.
Right.
So we approached it more from, we're going to start with that 124 history. What would the old guys have done?
I mean, it does seem, to anybody watching this, is probably going to come to this same conclusion. You've got a head start on most of these guys, though, because most of the guys building Fairchild clones are in an area where they haven't got a history of building tube equipment. All of the guys I can think that do build that, with a couple of exceptions maybe, are going, find the schematics, assuming, because when I ask somebody, why are you building a Fairchild? They're like, oh, because you can get the tubes again.
I don't think you're actually getting the tubes the same. Do they function in the same unit? Yes, but they don't sound the same.
Interesting.
That guided why the unit is what it is. So
I definitely want to hear a pair now.
okay,
Yeah.
we can do that.
I always think of overheads, because when Ringo used to hit a cymbal, there was no perceptible attack.
Yeah.
It was just shh.
One thing it's great about, and we recently did a little snippet with Cobb, and that's what he said is the great thing about it is it works on everything. Jeremy's like, you guys are boring me. I got to work on 660s.
And you probably hear these kinds of conversations far too much.
Fairly often.
This piece of work here does all our switches. How long have you been here? You want to tell us?
19 in December, I'll be here 20.
What?
Yeah.
Okay, so she's one of our longest term people as well. Nikki does all the switches, so every time those curve bender things with all the 20 switches around all there, she does them all by hand.
Mm-hmm.
These are the single layers. Are these curve bender ones?
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, so she sits here. I think she might hate me at this point, but she sits here and just does these constantly so we can get curve benders out the door. So
Better say you can do them in your sleep.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
She's got them memorized.
I got 'em memorized.
Yeah, she doesn't even have her map out. As you can see, she knows it's just they go in this order. Here we go. So, but it's nice because these are quite complex and the soldering is very detailed and fine. And if you look closely, you can just see how immaculate her solder joints are, you know? So,
Incredible.
talking you up, Nikki.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
So she has her N on all of them, so everyone knows they were done correctly.
I saw the N earlier when I was looking at them.
Yep. So these are curve benders in their infancy, and they're just starting out. They're getting all the capacitors for the tone selections on there, which is a pretty detailed process as well. They're fairly
Time-consuming, I
Yeah,
imagine.
fairly packed in. They're all done by hand. Again, you can't do that with a machine. And then there's another layers that go across the top. You can see the rows of capacitors for the filters. The inductors go there. The germanium amps go there. And then all these holes along here get a wire, just and it goes up to all those switches I think we were looking at earlier. So just building them all at once. Do you want to talk to the camera, Kay? You're online famous. Kay has been in a few videos. Like Iowa Public Television actually did a feature called Iowa Entrepreneurs, and we got to be part of it where they feature businesses in Iowa.
Wonderful.
And they did a bunch of interviews with Kay, and she kind of became a little bit known, didn't you, Kay? How long have you been here, Kay? You're one of the earliest employees as well.
Probably about 19 years.
19 years? Yeah. Yep.
Yep.
So you're doing, these are TG Opto?
Yes.
So that's the side chain side of the board. There's two
This is-
boards in it that
Yeah,
go
This is what it looks like when it's done.
with all its parts on it.
Yeah.
And then the opto module goes there, and then it wires to another TG board here with the audio circuits on it, the Class A TG Mark IV amp,
And then we
as we
have
call it.
worry about putting things on the back too. once in a
Yeah,
while.
sometimes we have some things on the back,
Yep.
get them all to fit right, and
Yeah.
but you can see they have examples hung up on the wall for various things. It's kind of fun.
Well, that's one of the reasons why we have it is that when we get a job, we can just go right there and
Yep,
pull it out,
grab it and off you go.
and we know where they're at.
Yep. How long have you been here?
Oh, I've been here, I don't know. for
Quite a
sure.
while, but I forget.
13, 14
Yeah.
years.
So, like, our whole staff has been here quite a while at this point. There's only a couple newer people. So,
Yeah.
Matt at 10 years is a youngster, you know?
New kid on the block.
Yeah. So, we really value, like, you know, because they know their job. They've done it all. They know how we want things and how the customer should have things delivered, you know, that kind of
Fantastic.
stuff. So, it's pretty cool.
Thank you. Lovely to meet you.
So these are all the TG mics that we were messing with. Cody does these up here. We do the red mics upstairs. Seth does those. But all the mics are listened to in the studio. We check front and back capsules on a drum kit. You just can't get, you know, it's really easy to find out if you need to reject a capsule too when you're actually doing it in real time in a recording environment where it's just not standing up. So that was a really important step we took, I think. I prefer making mics. I think it's the funnest thing to do. It's a little easier on the shop, other than taking time to sort of micromanage capsules to make sure they're correct. It's really sort of fun.
So that must be a big part of the process to make sure that the capsules are even good enough to put into a mic.
Yeah, I don't want to overstate it, but we've rejected entire batches before and say reskin all of these. I don't know if people know the intricacy involved in a capsule, like you have the ring, and most of the back the membranes are heat shrunk to the ring, right? So just a very slight difference in the amount of heat, and you'll get a tension difference, and the bass response will change. That kind of stuff. Just very simple thing, you know, small things that will make a huge difference. And that's why we have at times rejected entire batches of capsules. Sorry, these sound thin, you know, re-shrink them, re-skin them. It's important. I mean, when the customer's paying the amount of money for, like, a red mic, for example, I lose sleep at night if someone's not happy about it. It means, you know, the mics especially is, if anyone remembers us for anything, that's what I'd love them to remember, because it's a combination of the historical stuff with new ideas, taking it to a new spot and a new application. Like, it's like just remaking the same old thing is not all that fun, you know?
Yeah. I still remember the first time I heard the curve bender. I think that was with Dave. When did you first make the first curve bender?
It was like 07 or 06 maybe.
So it was before that. I was working with him. We did the Thrills record together. We did Hot Heat together.
Okay.
I want to say it was like 2004.
Okay. I could be, I can't remember exactly all the time, but
Yeah.
I do remember from that era, like, talk of it being used.
Yeah. He may have also had whatever you were doing.
Protos or...
Yeah, I presume he was pretty hot in those days. I mean,
Yeah.
he was making, because we'd done the Jet record, and that was absolutely massive.
Yeah.
So-
yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
And his sound was very much put it through a Neve console, do like really obvious EQ points, like, you know, put it through, boost 60 hertz. You know,
Yeah.
It wasn't so much about the magic; it was about using the best gear, as opposed to like.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he was definitely all over your stuff. He was the first guy I knew that had like everything that you made at that point.
Nice. Tell him thank you. Yeah. I'd like to meet him someday, honestly.
Oh, yeah, I thought maybe you.
No,
you
I don't know him, but
Oh.
a lot of his records were ones that I really wore out.
Are you friends with Sadi?
I don't believe I've ever met him.
Wow.
No.
I think he was probably the first person in LA that was pushing your gear.
Apparently, I'm a hermit.
Yeah, apparently so. I think he's more of a hermit. No, but he was like the first guy I knew that was
Okay.
like championing your gear, and he was
I know
with massive albums.
a lot of people that were friends with him, and I know like the gear passed around in that circle. Like I think Barisi is why I knew of him at first of Sardi.
What about Fiddlerman?
No, I don't know him.
Oh wow, he uses your stuff too.
I'm underconnected.
That's so surreal. All right, so let's.
Anyway,
what do you
more
wanna
TG mics, more. I don't know. I don't know what else is there to talk about.
All right, there's so many goodies in here. Let's start over here.
Start over here.
This is what I'm packing in my suitcase tonight.
So this is one of the transfer desks, they called them. It's model number TG12410 was the model number. I got this empty and then had to track down all the modules for it over time. But this is a huge part of Abbey Road history and still is to this day. I think all or most of their mastering rooms have these in full operation. Again, very ahead of their time. We did do a plug-in of this EQ really early on in our history. So some people may be familiar with that, but it's this compressor. It's got a TG1 style limiter in it, which is actually what ours is based on, is some of this exact version. The input cassette actually has the tape EQ section that we've used for a number of things. Presence filter modules, which is a 5th band of EQ that they had access to, and then high and low filters. A lot of stuff we've done has actually come from just this little package. Even the TG2 actually comes directly from this module right here. So it's all Class A. All this stuff is a Class A line stage.
Great. Well, I look forward to using it at home. Thank you.
Okay, right. Let's go.
Those look a bit Neve-ish to be sitting up here.
These were a custom thing. I had a Neve broadcast console at one point, and I made just a bunch of my own modules for it.
Oh, I see.
I bought it empty. So this is an inductor graphic EQ that I made to fit in that.
Okay, so what's this gorgeous looking
okay.
rack here?
So all this stuff is vintage modules. I have been lucky over the years to stumble on some little caches of parts and random, things. I bought a whole bunch of stuff that came out of EMI Africa, and I was just offered it as, we have a pile of EMI stuff. Do you want it? Here's the price. Like this, and we have a number of these around here, these down here as well. These are TG2, vintage TG2 preamps. So they're literally this module out of here.
But with new faceplates.
That I re-racked because most of the stuff I got didn't have faceplates. Like I said, it was kind of like a pile of stuff. So these are literally vintage TG modules, which are very, very rare, like in that form, These are passive EQs that were actually made out of these input modules. Again, how I said I took a lot of the cards I made.
Yeah.
Or got and made experimental things out of them, right? Because they all had so many parts. But these are basically the passive EQ circuits. And it's what's in our TG12411 channel module that we sell, which is a TG2 pre plus this EQ. And that's where that unit came from. It's experimental, trying new things. And so that input cassette from the mastering desk is like a gold mine of circuits, Just got so much cool stuff. These are the spreaders I was talking about.
Oh, okay. So this is for the MS.
Yeah, so the mid-side image. The spreaders are actually in the Abbey Road Waves plugins. So if people want to get an idea of what they do. They're really neat. So like if you take a doubled vocal, for example, and feed it to it, and it then spreads the two out.
Yeah.
It's very cool, those kind of things. Very cool. This is a VAL limiter, it's called, a vertical amplitude limiter, which is is also in some of these desks.
Right.
And it was used for when they were cutting to disc, so they could pump as much bass without the needle skipping. It's like a center compression kind of thing. And those are very neat. The circuit is very similar to the stock TG limiters that were in all the desks, but with variations in components and how it's set up. It's a neat variation of it. So That's one thing I use quite a lot of.
Okay, so we did talk about this, but we haven't got really into this. So
Right. So this is the RS114. This was one of the really early developments at Abbey Road when they making their own gear. This and the early passive curve bender were designed in the 50s by Mike Batchelor, who's
dumb questions, because I've just realised,
Yeah.
and I think Merrick talked about this before, but like, what does RS stand for? Is it recording studio?
recording studio.
Okay, and
Yep.
TG is?
TG is a weird one. The rumor is it stands for the gramophone company.
Okay.
With this company dropped.
I just thought I'd ask
Yeah.
because I know 100 people are probably like, why
Yeah.
didn't he ask that question?
Yeah, so that's where TG comes from.
Right.
Red is Recording Equipment Development Division.
Okay, so at the top here, I see some EMI filters.
These are presence filters. Again, it's the same one from the mastering desk. This is just a 2-banger rack that I have of them. So I had 2 extra ones.
So, I mean, presence for them is anywhere from 500 hertz to 10K.
Yeah, on the what's neat about the presence filter modules is this band is the high band off the Beetle desk,
Right.
the TG desks. This is what it was, high frequency, and then there was a set low frequency. So when we were talking about the curve bender, how we expanded it out, this is all the high frequency you had in the whole desk, right there, one band and only those frequencies. So why
It's
they
still a great selection.
No, it's great, and that's why it's on here, because it gave the engineers the selection off the mixing desk in the mastering section. So
Nice.
really neat unit. These are more like vintage module pre's, essentially these kind of things, but in a different package that I found in those piles of gear.
4 of those.
Yeah, so there's 4 per, and I've got some of them set up different ways because we were doing transformer testing and things on them.
And then it looks like we're moving down to the germaniums.
Yep, germanium compressors.
Geraniums.
Geraniums. This is the first 2 LTD2s I made like decades ago. They're in a bit rough shape at this point, but
I remember them well.
yeah. We haven't made those for quite some time.
But I see you do have an original Spectrasonics.
Yeah, Cobb made me get that.
Yeah.
He has a bunch of them and said, dude.
I have a pair of 610s.
Okay.
Yeah, they're
So
fantastic.
he got me onto that.
Now, the Altecs. Now,
Yeah.
so this is sort of not, I suppose, where it sort of all started from, yes?
Yeah. Like, obviously the engineers, the old staff, this is what they did. They got these and said, oh, they're a bit funky. They're not quite what we need. Let's turn them into what we want. And so I started, when we were making our units down here, I started with the exact same way because I wanted a benchmark of here's what it sounded like for them back in the day with an actual modified Altec per the instructions that I got from Abbey Road. And I actually did 6 different ones. It let me experiment, try a few variations, and have a really nice benchmark for where it needed to get to as far as transformers, etc., functionality. And we do actually have one from NASA.
I know, I like that. You were talking about that earlier.
Yeah.
Rather nice. And this one obviously went to the moon and back, yes?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was told that it was on
Yeah.
the moon.
Neil Armstrong was holding it. One giant step for man and Altec. Apart from the mic, this is what I want to hear most.
Okay, yeah. So these are like the first ones I built. And again, there's some variations like vintage tubes, vintage 6386s in this one, vintage inputs and output tubes, so I can compare new tubes versus old and direct.
And
the old ones are better. The new JJ 6386 is not the same.
right.
And we kind of touched on it before, but that's the whole reason, or a big part of the reason I went this direction, because I didn't feel like it was justifiable to make a 660 where
Why
the
are they
engine.
different? In your opinion?
Yes, in my opinion, in the same circuit, they have 5 dB less compression.
But what do you think's causing that?
Not manufacturing tubes myself. I'm not sure exactly what they're doing. The gain of the tube, if that's what you mean, is different so that it doesn't drive the compression as much.
Right.
That kind of thing. So there's literally less gain and literally less compression.
And if you made up the gain in a different way, would it change the sound?
Right, well, that was a big part of what I experimented with, and it, pardon my language, it F's it up. I struggled with that for a long time. It was a big part of the whole design of the unit, trying to come to terms with what I could accomplish that was directly related to the old ones versus what I had to just forget and literally start fresh, be like, this is what I have to work with. and that's why we did this way. You can't do a Fairchild nowadays, to me, if the tubes aren't right. They're just different. You know, the onset of compression is different, the knee and the slope, all that, because of the difference in gain and because of the difference in compression amount. They're also a good deal darker than the other ones, and that was what I really fought with, that because the really good old 6386s have an aggression, and people identify Fairchild 670s with that aggression.
We did say off camera, and I'm going to agree with them, because before you told me that, I named a famous 670 clone that Jack and I had tried out on a mix, and we both looked at each other when we flicked it on and said, "Where's all the high end gone?"
Yeah.
Which was not what I was used to with the 670.
Yeah. That isn't, to me, in my opinion, is not the design of the 670. It's the tube. Right. Because
that would explain a lot.
A nice 6386 vintage, like an RCA one or something, they have that that vintage sort of grab and coloration. And
I do wonder sometimes people associate vintage with not passing high end so well.
Right.
People are like, it's warm.
Right. But that's not the case with that. Those are fairly bright, aggressive tubes. And guys I've talked to, that's the reason they like 670s, you know? And to me, it's not possible to do that with new tubes. So.
Gorgeous. Well, I really want to hear these.
We'll send you 3, 4, 5.
6. 6 would be great.
These are the original first generation RS-124s. Yep. You can even see on here where I put P-Touch on there as we were changing features and deciding what we were going to do. Initially, we started just sort of making a few different versions, and then we decided, well, all the original ones are slightly different. Let's replicate some of the differences in those. So that's where the serial numbers came on board. And then we added this thing. This was Mirick's idea from Abbey Road. It's called the Superfuse, which they had on their plug-in. And it was basically just a crazy setting, you know, like really, really aggressive, really fast. And so you can switch it into Superfuse and it changes the light and you can tell it's switched on. It's just like a super fast, aggressive version of it. So these are my absolute pride and joy right here. This is 8 vintage TG limiters. These 2 are the first 2 that I got it would have been in the early 90s that we talked about briefly.
Oh, this was the beginning of your journey.
These are the 2. When I got them, they didn't have face plates, they didn't have meters, they didn't have knobs, they were in some screwy package, you know what I mean? All just mangled. The edge connectors were cut off, the back of them. I rebuilt them essentially over time as I found the right parts. But that's my pair that I've been using since I was in my early 20s that I'm just in love with, and we still use on drums like all the time. These 6 they're actually VAL, vertical amplitude limiters, which I was talking about with the mastering desk, which I modified to be slightly in between these and the actual VALs. So they're sort of a slightly more gentle version of the full-on console limiter, which I really like for other things when I'm going for like a milder color. They're still pretty aggressive though. This is where like things that we put on the Zener limiter, like we added a side chain to it, we added the attack to it. That came from building these. This is an input module from the mastering desk that I modified to be just a preamp, where in that it serves multiple functions. It's controlling the path of the mastering desk, and it also has a preamp that's identical to the TG2 in it, right? So this is an experimental one that I made that I also use for about everything, where I added switchable impedances. It has four different input impedances, and it switches between 2 different transformers, switches between an EMI input transformer and some vintage Marinair transformer, and switches the taps on those as well. So I use this when I'm testing dynamics and solid state condenser mics to see how the loading is affecting things and what they prefer to hear, you know. And so I can make recommendations to customers when they call about the TG2 and say, well, 300 or 1200 or this and that. And I say, well, on a 57, I usually do this, or on some of those types of things.
That actually does strike me as quite important.
Yes.
You can actually go, well,
Yes.
I use it, and this is how I use it.
Yes.
That's great.
This also has the tape EQ on it that we've used in a number of things. It's the same section that's on the TG microphone, so that I can actually apply it to or as I'm recording a guitar, for example, with a 57.
Are we calling it a tape EQ because when you were bouncing generations, you want to brighten it up a little bit?
No, they called it that because it was for playing back when they'd get tapes from America, or vice versa. It was so they could play an American tape on a European machine, calibrated machine, and not have to recalibrate. They hit this button and then the curves play back correctly, right? So we're using it in a completely different application just because it sounds really neat, you know? And that's why we put it in the TG mic, because it has a real depth to it and an openness on top and completely passive, and just, that's a Mike Batchelor design also.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So
And of course, here's the curve bender.
curve bender, yep. That's a big one for us. Did we talk about that story, how that came about? I forgot.
I can't remember, but Merrick showed us the original, which is
Yeah, the big passive one. yeah.
huge, with big steps
Yeah,
on
the
it.
big.
Yeah.
That
It's all
one was
mechanical, so when you turn it, it's
that one was 100% passive, 200 ohm in, 200 ohm out. Needed gain makeup afterwards and all that. This one we kind of coined the title because in the notation from a lot of the EMI stuff, they generally will refer to EQs as curve benders. You can see it in a few different references. So we're like, that's cool. Let's just use that. you
makes
know?
sense on an oscilloscope. You
Yeah,
can see it.
it's bending the curves, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So we wanted, with the idea behind this, we wanted to make a full-featured version of the TG EQs because the desk was fairly limited. And when they were mixing the anthology stuff, they did it on TG desks and would run out and EQ it on several channels, or EQ it on a channel and then on the bus out. And Pete Cobbin wanted more and asked if I could do it, and I said yes, let's do it. And it's over time, it's one of my favorite units we've done. You know, it's got the Mark I amp from the very first version of what I would call the Beatle desk from Abbey Road album, which are germanium, so it has a specific sound from that. It's a different sound than, say, our TG2s, which are the Class A higher power output. So it's a very special unit. I use it all the time. I especially like the half dB steps on it when you need to play with things just a little when you're tracking.
I know everybody that has one just screams about how good they are.
Ben Stiller moment going on here.
Wade, thank you ever so much.
Thank you so much for coming all the way to Iowa.
Iowa,
It means,
this is lovely.
means a lot.
It's a beautiful town. It's where you're from, so
Yeah,
you know it
yeah.
well.
Yeah.
You come here, you're like a big local employer. You've got a whole bunch of people working here, live around here, and congratulations
Thank
for doing
you.
that.
I appreciate it. It means a lot. We love what we do, and we like sort of trying to do things fun and creative, and it's been like a dream for me, literally. So
I can
I'm
imagine.
very, very happy.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Wade.
Thanks, man. Let's see you
really
soon.
appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. Leave any comments and questions for Wade down below, or Adam. We can throw him under the bus. Yeah, he's laughing now. And thanks. So long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, au revoir.
Cheers.
Yes. Ciao. Goodbye.